In this video, we will see how a typical machine learning workflow for making predictions looks like. In supervised learning in general, we are usually given multiple examples. We call them also training examples. This could be hundreds, thousands, if not millions of training examples. So here we are seeing examples of mushrooms that we want to classify as poisonous and not poisonous. And one key aspect of supervised learning is that for the training data, we have labels. So we know the true answers here. So here, for example, we have 2 poisonous mushrooms and 1 non-poisonous mushroom. And the task here is to learn how to predict whether a new mushroom is poisonous or not. So in supervised learning, we have a training data set that consists of training examples and the corresponding labels, which are essentially the true answers. The training dataset goes into the machine learning algorithm, which will process this dataset to come up with a predictive model. And the output of this process is the trained model that we can then use on new data. So this process of feeding the training data into the machine learning algorithm and coming up with this predictive model is called training. And then once we have the trained model, we can feed it new observations or new data points, and it can then make predictions. And this process of making new predictions is often also called inference. Now, we just looked at an example of supervised learning that is called classification. So that means predicting a class label. That's one category of supervised learning. Here at the bottom is another example where we are given photographs of different animals and we are predicting what type of animal we see, whether it's a cat or a dog in this example. Another example of supervised learning is regression. It's related to classification in the sense that we are given the true answer. However, in contrast to classification, we don't have a distinct label, we deal with a continuous value. So if you think about the example of predicting house prices, predicting how expensive a given house is, that's a regression problem because we predict a continuous number, for example, the dollar value of the house. So we just learned that supervised learning consists of 2 subcategories, classification and regression. Let's now take a look at the dataset in more detail, the dataset that we use for supervised learning tasks. So here we see an example of an unstructured dataset, where the input represents an image of something that we want to classify. So in this case, we have an image of a flower, and the correct label we want to predict is Iris setosa. And as we discussed earlier, there's also the concept of structured data, where the input is essentially a table, and each column represents a feature that someone extracted from the unstructured data. And to get to this structured data set, a domain expert would have to look at this unstructured data and extract the features that go into these columns. So in this example, someone applied a ruler to measure the width and the length of the sepals, which are a certain type of leaf of the iris flowers. So the process of extracting these features, we refer to this as manual feature engineering or manual feature extraction. And as we discussed earlier, where deep learning really shines is when we work with unstructured data. And the traditional and conventional machine learning algorithms, they are really good with tabular data or structured data. So in this course, ultimately, we want to learn how we can learn from unstructured data, because that's the main goal and strength of deep learning. However, just to get going and just to get familiar of how supervised learning works, our first classifiers will be working with structured data. Both tasks are related, both are supervised learning tasks where we want to predict labels. However, the input data might differ, and to start with, it's simpler to work with structured data. So in the upcoming videos, we will learn how machine learning classifiers work under the hood by looking at one of the earliest machine learning classifiers and implementing it in code.